Welcome to Saturday's Warrior. What is up? Today we are taking a look at BYU's 2023 football schedule, their inaugural season in the Big 12, to see if they have what it takes to reach 500. Because as it stands now, almost nobody in the conference, in the media, in Vegas really has BYU projected to reach 500. So today we're going to take a closer look at the schedule and where the games fall to see if BYU could perhaps surprise us on some of these wins and actually reach that benchmark of a bowl game. Because as BYU fans, we've really come accustomed to BYU at least making a bowl game every year. It's kind of the expectation, and we feel like that BYU's preparation through independence, and yes, losing some talent this last year to the NFL, but we really feel like they've been able to reload and the defense should be new and improved, that our expectation of a bowl game does not seem unrealistic. So let's take a look at it and see. All right. So here's BYU's schedule. And if you're anything like me, you've already poured over this thing many times and probably have it memorized. But the few things that stand out are first, and it's been well documented, that BYU is the one of the four new schools that'll be playing both Texas and OU this year. And this is what we wanted. Even though this theoretically makes our schedule that much more difficult, we want to be playing big boy football against the Blue Bloods and really test ourselves. And we would have been happy to have them around one more season to have another crack at them. Also, this is one thing that's a little disappointing to me, is that BYU's first home game as a Big 12 member against another Big 12 opponent is against Cincy, who's another new member, as opposed to a more established member of the Big 12. So it feels a little bit less like a Big 12 matchup, but that doesn't really matter because it kind of feels like we already had that game when Baylor came to town shortly after the announcement that we were going to the Big 12 was made. But then the other big thing is just being able to have the tune-up games at the beginning of the schedule and having the bye week in the middle. BYU is especially going to need it because right following that is probably the toughest stretch of their schedule. So they're going to need that break. And so we'll see how that does in allowing BYU to get some rest in the middle of the season. And hopefully it helps mitigate some of the injuries that we've seen over the years. So now let's go look at each matchup. And as we do, I'm going to kind of compare here. We have ESPN's expected likelihood that BYU is going to win these games. The percentage here that they've projected forward. And then over here, I went through ahead of time and before looking at ESPN's, kind of made my own picks, and we'll kind of compare where we think that BYU should come out on each of these games. And so first here we have Sam Houston, and this is a look at their schedule from last year to kind of give an idea of how they performed. They had a good record, but look at the competition they played, and these were, for the most part, lower scoring games against much lesser competition. So BYU should really pull this out. The question is more by how much do they win and how early can they start getting their starters rested and whatnot. And the same for the Southern Utah game. I mean, these even higher than I did. So really, those should be automatic wins for BYU. Then going to Arkansas, I mean, BYU's not really given much of a chance to win this game. And it's true, Arkansas really starts out with a couple of lesser opponents as well, that they should come into this really well tuned up and rearing to go. And they really handled their business against BYU in Provo last year. And so now the next year going and playing in their house, I understand why BYU is not given much of a chance to win. But one thing BYU might have going for them is Arkansas not taking them as seriously because of how the game went last year, and really looking ahead to LSU, especially if LSU starts off strong with a win against Florida State, and that really might have Arkansas looking ahead. I don't think so, and so I still think Arkansas is a heavy favorite, but I do give BYU more of a chance. I think our defense will really step up instead of giving if you look at this, their quarterback had the best game of, well, okay, the second best game other than that one against Missouri State, his best game of the season against BYU. And that's kind of how our defense was last year. It would continually let the best offensive players on the other team have some of their best games of their career or at least the season. And so I don't expect that to be the case this time. And so Arkansas might be in for a little bit of a surprise. Now, going to Kansas, this is another one. They very well likely could be coming into this 3-0 and very tuned up and ready to go. But I look at Kansas and, I mean, maybe they're looking ahead to Texas in the next week, but I don't know. I don't think so. I think they've got a good coach that's going to keep them focused. But I look at their schedule last year, and yes, they started off really strong, but it also wasn't the toughest competition. I mean, these are all good teams. Duke was a good team last year, but you see once they get deeper into the conference that they start losing more and more. And I don't think it's necessarily, I mean, yes, Daniels went down, and that was probably a big part of it. But even as he came back, you see, again, against tougher competition, that they still didn't win. So I think this game is actually going to be really even. And looking at it, ESPN does too. And this is another one that they actually gave BYU better odds. And so, yeah, I basically thought this is basically a toss-up, but giving the edge to Kansas because it is at home for them. If anything, I would say this indicates they think that BYU might be a little bit better, just giving Kansas the nod there. Now, Cincy, this one was a bit of a surprise for me that they had this one also as a toss-up. I think this is kind of a rebuilding year for them. They've got the new head coach, and they're coming off a game against OU and then coming all the way to Provo. I think the energy there, as I said before, it is going to be completely out of control. I think it's going to be wild. It's going to be loud, and this is going to be a late-night game in Provo. I just don't see how Cincy comes in and beats BYU. Still gave a conservative estimate on this one, but I really just don't see BYU losing that one. And now TCU, they very well could come into this game 6-0 if you look at the competition. Again, they played in a lot of close very, very close games last year, and in many ways they're expected to, they're a little bit of a question mark, I think, going into this year, but still expected to be possibly even better. And so BYU comes in, will have had some tough fights. Fortunately, they will have had their bye week, but this will be a tough matchup, and I just don't think that, I don't know. I think there's enough uncertainty that keeping BYU at 16% seems really low. I give them better odds than that. I just think we still got to see what TCU is and who they are, and I think BYU is going to come in and play them tough. And you know what? TCU rather wasn't exactly dominant last year, that I think they leave that opening and give teams a chance. And if that's there, I think BYU is experienced enough and has enough talent that they could surprise TCU. Not saying they will, but let's give them some chance there. Then we have Texas Tech. Looking at their schedule, I mean, by the time we play BYU, they will have been coming off a game against Kansas State, and then the following week is TCU. So with that purple sandwich there and a trip to Provo, I give BYU a slightly better chance slightly better chance than Texas Tech to win the game, but much better odds than ESPN. ESPN thinks that Tech is going to be the favorite there in that matchup, and again, I think the energy in Provo is going to be a lot and give BYU a real home crowd advantage. So I give BYU a slight edge in that matchup, and maybe I'm being too optimistic, but we really got to see it from Texas Tech still. I know they're going to be a contender for the conference championship, but it's, again, one of those conferences where anything could happen. And then Texas, this one, if we look at it, they have some tough games following BYU that, depending how BYU's doing in the season up to that point, they could overlook them. But because of Sark, I don't think he's going to allow his team to overlook BYU. I think he'll really want to win that game and prove himself against his alma mater. So I don't think that'll happen. Now, 5% chance seems extremely low. So I give BYU a better chance than that. And, BYU's come out and shocked Texas before. So I wouldn't write them off completely. And West Virginia. Now, this is a game that I hope to attend. We'll see, how West Virginia is doing at this point in the season. They might have fired their coach. The team could be in disarray because they've got a really tough out of conference and top end of the schedule that if they underperform or lose, even if these are in close games against good teams, there's a chance that they fire their coach and who knows what will be happening at this point. So BYU could catch a break there. On the other hand, West Virginia, that they're coming out with a lot to prove this year, and they've been completely written off. And also BYU has not done well traveling to the East Coast. And so coming off of a very physical game against Texas, and win or lose, I imagine that BYU is going to come out somewhat beat up from that game and then go all the way to West Virginia, I think will be tough. However, I still think they have a good chance to win that game. I still, feel hopeful there. Okay, so I actually recorded this video a couple weeks ago, but then all the realignment things happened and it got put on the back burner. But since then, more allegations have come out in the gambling investigation at Iowa State, and it looks like they will be losing a number of starting players and other players that they will not have on the team this year, including their starting running back Brock, as well as their QB Deckers. And so really this becomes a must win for BYU. I really, it is in Provo. I really don't see how they let this one get by them. If they do, then they really don't deserve to go to a bowl game. But either ESPN has not updated their analysis or really they don't think it moves the needle, but they barely have BYU get a bump here. I really think that this changes them to, a 70-75% likelihood of winning this game, if not higher. I'm being generous here because there's a lot of question marks. So that number won't be reflected in the rest of the video, but ultimately it doesn't change the outcome of the analysis overall. And then Provo gets Oklahoma coming to town. This will be huge. BYU is currently 2-0 against Oklahoma. We'll see if that holds. But again, right now, everyone's projecting Oklahoma to be really good, and there's a very good chance they will. They're blue blood, and they've got another year under their belt with their current head coach, and so they are likely to be a very good team. But having just an 18% chance for BYU to win this game at home, I don't think we've seen enough from Oklahoma to give them that kind of credit at this point. And so I think that there is a better shot, that BYU has a better shot to win. And right now, it's kind of a toss-up. I mean, also, if things don't go so well for Oklahoma like they expect, maybe we catch a break and Oklahoma is just not as invested, or maybe they're overlooking this game. They're rolling and they think, we got this. Either way, I just think this is a huge, huge game for BYU in Provo. We'll see. Maybe it's even a late game in the evening where BYU is going to do well and Oklahoma is going to have to come out to the mountains in the winter with the altitude. I just feel like BYU's got a better shot than that. Again, maybe being too optimistic. And then Oklahoma State, this is another wild card. I expect they'll be, definitely on the higher part, on the top part of the conference, but to what level and how good they are, it's hard to say. They should be a good team. This is going to be their senior night, the final game of the season, and I think they'll come out big against BYU. But I do think BYU has a shot to come out there and surprise Oklahoma State too. I think this is a team that's had ups and downs, and I think BYU has a shot at it. So when we look at these totals now, ESPN says really that BYU should be just shy of and probably come out with roughly 5 wins. Whereas looking at these, maybe I was a little over optimistic, but think that they could pull out 6 wins seems realistic. And if we look at this game, break it into chunks, and how many, if we just look at whole numbers, how many games do we expect them to come out of each of these? Kind of weighted this is obviously I think we got 2 wins up here, and then during those next 3 games before the bye, I think they should come out with at least 1 win. And then those next 3, this is a really tough stretch, but it's not completely. I mean, obviously, there's a very good chance that BYU comes out of these 3 with no wins, but I think there's a real chance that they surprise at least one of these teams and get another win here. And then we look at this final stretch of 3, and I think that is another 1 win. And so that then brings it all down to Oklahoma State. So if BYU is able to do that and get those other wins throughout those stretches, it comes down to this game, and can they beat Oklahoma State in home in the final game of the season? And it'll definitely be tough, and I think this is where BYU can prove themselves. So I think no matter what happens, it's going to be close. I really would believe, if at the end of the year, BYU finished anywhere from 4 wins to maybe 8 wins. Even that seems far, probably more 4 to 7. I'd believe any of that, and maybe an 8th win if you're counting the bowl win. And so it's a wide variance. The conference is open, and really anything could happen. But I think this is how we really will measure BYU success this next season, is if they're able to reach a bowl game. And even if they don't, that doesn't mean it's not a success. They're in the Big 12. We know that there's going to be a lot of change and a lot of growing pains there as BYU adapts and works to catch up to the other teams who have been established Power 5 programs. But we've come to expect BYU to be able to outperform that. So BYU is really going to have their work cut out for them. I would believe if you told me anything between 4 to 7, maybe 8 wins, 8 if you're counting the bowl win at the end of the season, I could believe any of that. But I really think right there between the 5 and 6 and wins, and that's really going to be our benchmark of success, right? Is if we feel like BYU can come in and at least win a bowl game in their first year, that's really above and beyond what's expected of them and puts them in good footing going forward. But the good thing about having low expectations is that there's nowhere to go but up. And so, these are relatively modest expectations. We can go into the season, and whether they reach a bowl game or not, we can just be happy that they are in the Big 12 out there competing. Now, if they're getting shellacked every game, it's going to be tough. But if they're out there competing in all these games and really fighting, and then we can just be happy. We're in the Big 12. We're getting those games. This is what we wanted. And so we can't complain too much about it. But what do you think? How many wins do you think BYU is going to end up with at the end of the season? Do you think they reach a bowl game, or do you think they'll be sitting out? Let us know in the comments, and please be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll see you next time.